I'm very honored to introduce Justin Reich, who's the program co-chair for next year's conference, and he'll be speaking about the civic mission of MOOCs, measuring engagement across political differences in forums. Thank you so much.
We'll get there. That's the last slide, not the first. That would be too much to start the morning. Here's the paper in reverse. That's like a flipped, yeah, it's a different flipped conference. It actually doesn't work that well. Great, well, welcome everyone. Super excited to be here. Thanks to the program committee and everyone else for getting us started. This is work that I've done with my colleagues Brandon Stewart and Dustin Tingley who aren't here, and Kimia Mavon, who is, by way of a sort of broader introduction to the work. I think great learning institutions from kindergartens to universities try to do three kinds of things. They prepare people for lives of, they prepare people for ethical and reflective lives. They prepare people for their roles in civil society, and they prepare people to do meaningful work in the labor market. In the United States, over the last few years, well, throughout history, all those purposes compete with one another. In the United States, we're currently in a phase where we're really obsessed with the third of those three things. And certainly, I think there's a turn and MOOCs and online learning towards the third of those three things. But I actually think the ambitions of our field should cover all three of those exercises. I think we should ask questions about how does online learning help people lead more reflective, ethical, richer lives? How does online learning help people be better citizens in a democratic society? I think our research questions should chase those goals as much as we figure out, how can we most efficiently sort of make sure that people are memorizing the right answers that'll let them go on to the next steps. So this work is sort of, that's probably the most important thing that I have to say, is that this work is in a very small way attempting to pursue some of those questions about how can online learning help support the people's learning in civil society and their roles in a democracy. And fortunately, the Spencer Foundation had a grants competition about developing new kinds of measures of the degree to which people make public arguments using evidence, and the way that we might be able to develop new measures of engagement across political differences. So this work is funded by Spencer's New Civic Measures Initiative, and I think sometime in the next 18 months they're going to have another sort of round of that grants competition that I would encourage people from this community to apply for. So the broad goal of our sort of multi-year research program is to come up with some computational measures of the degree to which people with different kinds of political beliefs directly engage with one another. And the vision of this would be that eventually these sort of computational measures would culminate in a kind of dashboard. So if you were an instructor, and you of course don't have time to read the thousands and thousands of posts in your forums, but there might be some dashboard somewhere that gave you a sort of green light if there was evidence of really healthy conversation, and there was red lights if there were evidence of unhealthy conversation, and you would have some kinds of strategies then that you could use based on that dashboard. And we're a long way from that, but this work, that's where sort of all of this is headed. Broadly speaking, there are probably two theories to the ways that people engage with each other on the internet around political issues. One theory you might call the filter bubble theory, which suggests that people just form their own echo chambers, their own ideological silos. They talk with the people who already agree with them. They read news that confirms opinions that they already have. There's another argument, Eli Parser is someone who's made that case. Howard Rheingold has made another case that actually the internet is full of what you might call interest-driven spaces, where people with really diverse beliefs connect with one another, and they might be very different kinds of people. So, folks who go to forums about Minecraft probably have really different beliefs. In my hometown of Boston, the people who go to the Red Sox Nation forums have widely different political beliefs, and they still sort of hang out together there. So one question we could ask, are politically themed MOOCs, things like Introduction to Education Policy or Introduction to American Government, are they more likely to be bridging spaces or siloed spaces? Are they more likely to be places where people seek out folks who have the same opinions as them, or places where people come together? We were fortunate when we started this work that there was, so all the research that we're doing now, the prerequisite for it is surveying people about their political beliefs. And so we've started putting some political surveys in the beginning of courses that are being run out of HarvardX, but there was actually one, which we just happened to be fortunate, that already had been surveying their participants about their political beliefs. And it was a class called Saving Schools. It's taught by a guy, Paul Peterson, who, if you happen to know anything about American education policy, you might recognize him as someone who is a leader of sort of conservative thinking about education policy. So a big fan of vouchers, a big fan of market-based and choice-based school reform. So definitely, probably most people wouldn't recognize that. They would probably just look at the title and go, oh, Saving Schools, that sounds sort of interesting. But for people who are familiar with education policy discourse, they would go, oh, that guy, he's sort of the kind of person who would advise Mitt Romney and that kind of thing. Paul Peterson runs a journal called Education Next, which for a whole bunch of years has surveyed folks about their education political beliefs. In American education policy discourse, there are some policy questions that don't line up very neatly between Republicans and Democrats in our country, but there are a handful of them that do. So pretty reliably, your beliefs on vouchers, your beliefs on teacher unions, your belief on tenure, and your belief on taxes to fund education is reasonably well correlated with whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. People talk to one another in these classes, and the forums are sort of the main site in which we're asking the question, do people who have different kinds of political beliefs about education policy, do they end up forming their own threads and subthreads, or do they end up talking directly to one another, with the idea that from political philosophers going back to Plato and John Dewey and lots of other folks, that in a civil society, one of the things that education should do is facilitate and encourage people with diverse political beliefs to directly engage one another's ideas. So here's sort of broadly the way we think about doing this work. We think there are maybe two dimensions that we could reliably look at to evaluate engagement across difference. One is the degree to which people in threads sort of form their own sub-discussions with only people who share their ideas, and to what extent they have integrated threads with people with diverse ideas. And then we also think that we can look at people's language. We imagine that in healthy conversations, people with different beliefs will converge upon a shared language, and in less healthy circumstances, groups with different beliefs might end up talking past each other. So the example I use, which is sort of another American-centric one, but if we were to have a debate about gun control in the United States, one group might say public health, and the other group might say Second Amendment. And those two groups would nominally be talking about gun control, but they actually could be using different language and sort of talking past one another. So our vision is that the best conversations will have these integrated threads with sort of a shared use of language. And we think that probably humans can do this much better than computers can, but computers can probably do it much faster. And so to figure out the thread integration axis, we're using sort of forum structure analysis and social network analysis. And then to look at the use of language, we're using various kinds of unsupervised topic models, particularly this one that my colleagues developed called the structural topic model. We ask 4 kinds of questions, which is who registers for these courses? What are the political beliefs of the people who show up? Of those who register, who ends up actually participating? So to what degree does your political belief predict your inclination to participate in the class? Do students directly talk to people who have different political beliefs as them? And then do the students in this class converge across a shared language? Those are the sort of 4 questions that we're tackling. And here are some early answers from one class. So there are about 5,000 participants in this one MOOC, Saving Schools. Those are people who clicked into the class at least once. They end up looking pretty much like most of the folks who take these kinds of courses. About 2,000 of them took the survey, and then about 600 of them were people from the United States. The survey only, the survey that we used only applied to people who were from the United States. People from overseas got a different set of questions. So we just looked at U.S. forum posters, who actually then committed to making a post in the forum. And they're a little bit older than most folks. They're substantially more likely to be women than in many other online classes. Nearly half of them were practicing teachers, which also probably has some implications for their answers. But one of the things that you can see here are the 4 questions that are sort of the most salient with American political left-right divide. And you can see that in these 4 questions, there's a pretty good diversity of thought across all 4 of them. The funding question is a little bit more tilted towards increasing funding, maybe because half of them depend upon that funding. But the other 3 questions are reasonably well distributed. So these were the questions that we used to create a kind of political ideology score. And in a principal components analysis, things sort of nicely load onto one eigenvector. So that's the one that we use for sort of the subsequent pieces that we'll show. So the first question we get asked is, who registers? Do students with diverse political beliefs register for saving schools? And it looks like that they do, that there's just sort of using our political ideology scale. There's this maybe a little shifted towards liberals, but this relatively nice bell curve distribution of different people who participate. I think you could reasonably have predicted in advance, hey, this is a course from Harvard. I bet it's just going to be a bunch of liberals who show up to this class. So you might say, oh, this is a course by Paul Peterson. It's just going to be a bunch of conservatives who show up to this class. But it turns out that lots of different folks do. We then ask the question, who participates? Do only certain people along this distribution actually end up feeling comfortable or incentivized or whatever else to jump into the forums? And that doesn't seem to be the case. So there's other measures that we have of this, but I think the scatter plot shows it nicely, that we're fortunate that there are sort of super posters on the extreme left, super posters on the extreme right. Our one major super poster was either a super committed moderate or someone who's very confused. And then if you do regression analysis and things like that, there's sort of no correlation. I mean, this is if I was teaching the class, this is what exactly I would want to see, that people with lots of different kinds of political beliefs are inclined to participate. But it could be that people with diverse beliefs participate, but they find sort of different chunks of the forums to participate with one another, and that doesn't seem to be the case. One of the things that we did is that in the paper, and we discussed this more, we divide threads into things that have no political salience, questions about logistics and stuff, things that are less politically salient, which are basically things that are substantive topics but not sort of directly addressed in the class, and then the things that were sort of most sort of identified as politically salient in the class. And you can see that these are measures of the sort of overall balance of ideology in any particular thread, and people from the left and right sort of roughly equitably show up in nearly all of the different threads. We tried lots of ways of doing exploratory social network analysis, and the only thing you ever get is sort of one giant hairball because everybody sort of roughly generally talks to one another. Another analysis, which you can read more about in the paper, is we say for each post, what's the sort of what would chance predict be the number of comments per reply, and you can see that and then what are the actual number of replies that show up, and you can see that to some extent liberals are more likely to reply to liberals, moderates more likely to reply to moderates, conservative more likely to reply to conservatives. But generally speaking, people also reply to people sort of across all of those different beliefs. So the findings there were not particularly strong. They generally suggest to us that to some extent people are replying directly to other folks. One thing that we actually have just discovered in the last 3 weeks, which I think is incredibly useful to always think about, the way that we do these kinds of analyses is we make the assumption that if a person clicks reply to another person's post, that they're talking to that person. That turns out to be, to some extent, not at all the case. So here's one example of this. A lot of it is caused by the fact that in edX forums, you're limited to a thread depth of 3. So this is a second-level post, and this is a series of third-level posts. And you can't read these, but someone makes this comment, and then this person replies to this person. And this person would actually like to reply to this person, but can't click reply to that. The only way that they can put their text sort of near this person's comment is clicking reply to this person. And then this person is actually replying to this person, and this person to this person up here, and this person here. So in our sort of metadata, all of these people, all 5 of these people clicked reply to this person, but there in fact, as we look at it more closely and more qualitatively, they're talking to sort of different people within there. So there's but we'll have to go back and revise a couple of these kinds of analyses as we realize, probably something that we should make sure we do more often, that you can make a series of inferences from back-end data that when you look closely at what people are actually doing, the meaning of their behavior can be quite different from what your initial assumptions are. So that part of the paper is wrong, but we'll publish a retraction later. One thing that probably does work, though, is our hunch is that upvoting behavior is not affected by that problem. Like if you click upvote to a person's reply or comment, you probably actually are trying to communicate something directly about your opinion about that person. And again, we find that while there's some sort of homophily to be found there, for the most part, people are willing to interact across those ideas. So our read is that, kind of broadly speaking, do we ask the question, do students engage across difference? And they seem to. We don't seem to have a lot of evidence of really strong siloing of people with similar beliefs sort of finding their own separate threads to talk to one another. And as we're doing more qualitative analysis, this also sort of seems to be confirmed in what we're reading, that people seem to directly disagree with one another in meaningful and respectful ways around substantive issues. In ways that seem intellectually productive. We also did some looking at language differences. We use a set of tools called the structural topic model, which does it's a software package that does a lot of what other kinds of unsupervised topic model software packages do. But it has some nice sort of built-in, it's very simple to use and has really nice built-in display features, like we set it to find 12 topics based on some ideas that we have, and it comes up with these list of exclusive words. It comes up with these nice charts which shows the degree to which people, from the degree to which a topic is more likely to be prevalent in people with more liberal or more conservative positions. And generally find, this was for one thread about the Common Core, which is America's major curricular reform effort right now. And we find in 9 of the 12 topics that there's no statistically significant difference between these two groups. There are 3 of them in which we can detect there are some differences around the politicization of the Common Core, problems with the Common Core, costs and choice, but these differences are substantively quite modest. I'll pass over those. We looked at another thread that had to do with vouchers, similar kind. We looked at lots. These are 2 examples that we show. We looked at lots of different threads, and generally we found that we couldn't see a lot of differences in how people with different political beliefs used language to describe what they were talking about. So it does seem like, our sort of general assessment is, do students use a shared language? And it seems like they do. It seems like that they manage to converge on a shared set of conversational topics with which to engage one another. So what this sort of leads us to believe, is that here we are, in the United States, America is going through this kind of unbelievable, I don't know if people from the rest of the world might not know this, but it's an election year in the United States. You may have heard. There's sort of lots of writing about the kind of incredibly hyper-partisan world that we live in. But one thing, we think there's actually some pretty strong evidence that if you said to yourself, I would like to go online and I would like to have reasonably civil discourse about a political topic among different people who have different ideas and will not necessarily agree with me, at least the Saving Schools MOOC seems like it's actually a pretty good place to be able to do that. I presented this work to Ethan Zuckerman, who leads the Future of Technology, the Future of Civic Media Lab at MIT, and his first response was, "Your measures are wrong. There's no way that this exists like this." And then he thought about it a little more. He thought, well, maybe it does. Maybe actually the internet sort of gets a bad rap for the kind of horrible kinds of discussions that happen on YouTube comments or the Chronicle of Higher Education comments or other despicable places like that. But maybe there actually are a bunch of places where people are getting together and conversing in different ways. This leads to a bunch of good questions about what are the kinds of things that we could do to make courses more hospitable to this kind of civil discourse? Another question is, to what extent, maybe Saving Schools was doing a bunch of things that we don't understand quite right. We've taken a look at a second course now, which we'll write up eventually, an Introduction to American Government class that had very, very similar responses. And we're going to try, as Harvard and MIT put out more courses, the sort of only prerequisite really for doing this work is asking people some questions about their political beliefs. So we use the World Value Survey, and in the United States we use the Cooperative Congressional Election Survey. If any of you know that there are courses that are going on that have some kind of political theme to them, or you think it would be interesting to investigate these things, please let me know. And I'd love to help, get you set up with some of these surveys and maybe set up with some of our tools so we could look at some of these things together. So we're going to try to replicate these methods in additional courses. We're doing more sort of qualitative analyses to get a kind of ground truth to compare with our measures. And we're trying to look more and see whether the aggregate is the right level to look at this or to be more thread specific. But we're excited about this line of inquiry and about thinking about the civic mission of MOOCs. So thanks to the folks in Saving Schools and the course team for helping us out. And I think we can take 8 minutes or something like that to have some questions if people have any. Questions? This young woman here. Good. So there are several things in there. One is, do people's actual beliefs change? And two, do people's inclination to engage with people across difference change? The second one, it seems like we would assuredly want people's inclination to engage across difference to change. And we probably should do some more right now we've sort of lumped everything into like one giant model, and it seems like we should look at sort of threads over time and things like that. We're partnering with another psychologist at the Harvard Kennedy School who's developed some scales around people's inclination to engage across difference. Whether or not people's political beliefs should actually change in a course like this is actually, to me, a really interesting question. You might say one successful outcome of a course like this would be that, maybe Paul Peterson would like everyone's beliefs to shift to the right. And if he wants that, that's fine. That seems like a reasonable outcome to have courses that are based on advocacy. But you might also say, like, I just want everyone's beliefs to be stronger. I just want people to be more informed and to be more extreme in what they believe. Or you might say, well, I want everyone to to me, there's no sort of correct outcome of the directionality of how people's beliefs should change. Like if I was teaching a course like this, I guess I would probably want everyone to feel more ambivalent about everything, because that's sort of the way I feel. Like I would want them all sort of converging on the middle. But I'd also be pretty happy, to me, it's harder to kind of figure out what the right answer is for that. Mm-hmm. Not about politics in general. Yep. Yeah, and that's a good. You might Paul Peterson might want there to be some kind of advocacy towards more choice-based, market-based reforms, and other people teaching a class might be like, no, I just want to present the two issues and let people, reinforce their previous existing beliefs or whatever else. But yeah, doing longitudinal work seems like a really logical sort of step to be more nuanced about this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And our hope would be, if it sort of confirms with kind of civic education theory, that the people who learn more actually are the people who are more likely to engage across difference. And if that's not the case, then that's sort of interesting things to unpack. Carolyn?
Yeah, so I'm really curious about how the model was estimated to be able to make predictions on this data. So as I recall about the structural topic model, it's not fully unsupervised, but some of the text contributions have to be tied to some external observed variable that you believe should be related to their political affiliation. So what was that external?
It's the ideology score. So this is the it doesn't not every structural topic model has to be. You can just do a sort of fully unsupervised model, but you can. But then you can't do that. Yeah. So the covariate. So you can include a whole range of covariates, and the covariate that we include in here is the same one that we use to break people up into liberal, moderate, and conservative. It's the one that we estimate from these 4 questions. So that's where that comes from. And nominally, the guys who made it would know better than me, but their case is that the advantage of a lot of the ways people would do this is you would use a typical unsupervised topic model and then sort of run correlations afterwards to these kinds of metadata, and they would say that actually they get a little bit better results by basically baking those kinds of correlates into the model. So sort of like a hierarchical linear modeling is sort of baked into the unsupervised topic model at the same time. It's not trained, so it's unsupervised, but it's basically for the threads there are, the longest of them have hundreds of posts, and a typical post probably has between 50 and 600 words in it or something like that, probably with a mean of 150 or something like that. All right, 2 more here, maybe.
So it's very interesting, and so you give us an example of sort of meaningful discourse with people with differing political beliefs. You also gave some examples where it doesn't happen. I didn't think Wikipedia sometimes also has articles about controversial topics that you feel are simply marketing in the end. So it happens sometimes and it doesn't happen at other times. And what's your take on what were factors that might have contributed here? Is it just a little people, or is it?
Yeah, I think that so why are people horrible to each other in the Chronicle of Higher Education comments and not here? Because actually a bunch of features are very similar. So everyone is anonymous. Everyone has a throwaway account that, if I kick you for being a jerk from the forums, you can just make I'm still a jerk too, and go back in and keep, railing against people. I think, we have no idea what is it that sort of but it does seem like an interesting question that conceivably these findings help us ask of what is it about the construction of people's experience being initiated in this course? How important is it that there's a teaching fellow who's pretty engaged and who you see on video and who you get to know a little bit, who's sort of asking questions and modeling some of this? There's definitely no instructions on how to be civil. I had a student who went and looked at 20 different MOOCs on 20 platforms, and almost none of them have any instructions whatsoever about how to interact with other people in forums, no suggestions or guidance whatsoever. The last thing I will say about Wikipedia, though, is that there have been people who have done some pretty good, using Wikipedia talk discussion pages as training sets to identify which of them are horrible discussion talk pages and which of them are people being civil to one another, sort of coding those and then using those codes to run supervised models on other kinds of forum data to get sort of automatic supervised methods of whether or not people are being civil to one another. So that might be one sort of subsequent work. Well, I'm happy to talk about this, especially with anyone who has courses sort of like this that they might be interested in using some of our measures or code doing things around, but my time is up.
I would just like to say, I'm sorry, we'll clap in a second. The next speaker up, while that person is setting up their computer, then you can take them.
Okay, great. From the middle. courses, which any of us can look at, which except for like the Coursera folks who have all the back-end data on all of the courses, usually the end that any of us are working on is very, very small. So it's hard to make comparisons across a couple of courses. But we're definitely interested in the sort of subsequent